Welcome back to our channel. Discover the top 5 rare dimes hiding in plain sight. Like and subscribe to see if you have one. The year was 1965, a moment carved in the middle of change. America was split between tradition and revolution, between polished optimism and quiet unrest. The civil rights movement had ignited something irreversible. The Beatles were echoing through living rooms, and a war overseas was beginning to define a generation. But inside the cavernous halls of the United States Mint, another, quieter revolution was taking place. One that would change coins themselves. Silver had become too expensive. Rising metal prices and increased hoarding meant that the U.S. government needed to act fast. By the time President Johnson signed the Coinage Act of 1965, silver dimes, quarters, and half dollars were officially done. From that point forward, new dimes would be struck from a copper-nickel-clad composition, no more of the precious metal that had once backed the face of Roosevelt. The changeover was urgent, chaotic, and not without its stumbles. The mint had to retool presses, adjust feeding mechanisms, and recalibrate quality control systems, all while keeping up with public demand. Billions of coins needed to be made, and quickly. Efficiency was everything. Accuracy took a back seat. And that's where the cracks started to show. In that rush, somewhere between the final silver strikes and the first clad issues, a few errors slipped into the world. Not many. Just a handful. But one of them would remain hidden for decades, traveling quietly from hand to hand, pocket to drawer, drawer to jar, until it fell into the hands of someone who knew exactly what they were looking at. Nathaniel Parks had always been drawn to old things. A high school history teacher in rural Illinois, he spent weekends browsing flea markets and antique shops. His passion wasn't for buying, but for stories, bits of forgotten history, buried beneath dust and time. Coins, to him, were miniature relics. He'd buy them for $1, sometimes $2, and line them up on his bookshelf between model tanks and yellowed newspaper clippings. One cloudy Saturday in 2018, at a small market just off Route 34, Nathaniel stopped at a booth cluttered with cigar boxes, faded records, and rusted tools. A woman in her 60s was selling a drawer of coins she said belonged to her late husband. Most were ordinary, Buffalo nickels, Eisenhower dollars, a few wheat pennies. But there was a pile of dimes, some newer, some older, most overlooked. Nathaniel scooped a few into his palm, letting the light catch their edges. That's when he saw it. A 1965 Roosevelt dime, nothing fancy, no mint mark, just like millions of others. But something felt off. It was the luster. Not the flat gray sheen of a clad coin, but the rich, slightly warmer tone of silver. He turned it on its edge and paused. No copper strip. Just a clean, uniform silver edge, like the dimes he remembered from his father's coin jar. He didn't say a word. He added it to his handful and paid $5 for the lot. That night, under the harsh light of his desk lamp, he pulled out a scale. The coin weighed 2.50 grams. That was the pre-1965 silver dime standard. But dimes struck after the transition were lighter, 2.27 grams, thanks to the new layered metal composition. His breath caught. He reached for his magnifying glass and examined the coin more closely. The strike was crisp, almost proof-like. Roosevelt's hair was sharply detailed, the motto clean and bold. The rim was strong, the reading tight. It didn't look like a worn coin that had been mistaken for silver. It looked like a silver coin that wasn't supposed to exist. He began researching. Deep dives into coin forums. Articles about the Coinage Act. Mint reports from 1965. What he found sent chills down his spine. That year, the U.S. Mint was supposed to destroy or convert all remaining 90% silver planchets. But in the haste to meet production deadlines, several of those planchets had reportedly been fed into presses by mistake. A small number of 1,965 dimes, no more than a few dozen known, had been struck on silver planchets instead of clad ones, but it wasn't just the metal. Nathaniel's coin had something else. A faint doubling on the date. He checked again. The 5 had a subtle but distinct shadow curve along its inner edge. The "In God We Trust" appeared slightly overlapped on the lower right. His pulse quickened. Doubling on coins is a highly prized error, especially when it's on the date or prominent lettering. And when combined with a transitional planchet error? That was the kind of anomaly that collectors whispered about in auction rooms. Nathaniel sent the coin for grading and authentication. The results came back after 4 excruciating weeks. NGC labeled the coin as 1965 Roosevelt dime, struck on 90% silver planchet with obverse doubling. Weight, 2.50 g. Grade, MS63. And in parentheses, transitional error. The authentication confirmed what Nathaniel already knew in his gut: this wasn't just a mistake. This was a relic. A phantom coin that had no business surviving the chaos of 1965. Within days of posting the slabbed coin to a collector's forum, Nathaniel's inbox lit up with offers. 5 figures. Then more. Some wanted to buy it immediately. Others wanted to feature it in exhibits, write articles, or include it in registries of modern rarities. Experts began digging into known examples. Only about 24 had been authenticated, and fewer still bore any sign of doubling. That made Nathaniel's coin not just rare, but unique. Then came the twist no one saw coming. An anonymous collector from New York reached out with a proposition. He claimed to have a nearly identical 1965 silver dime, struck in the same die state, with reverse doubling instead of obverse. He suggested, without hard proof, that both coins might have been struck during the same limited press run, possibly during a shift change or under an inexperienced operator trying to burn through leftover blanks. If the theory held true, these coins weren't isolated mistakes. They were siblings, born of the same error, separated by decades, reunited by curiosity and chance. It was never confirmed, but the mere possibility added a new layer of mystique to Nathaniel's dime. Collectors love a good mystery, and this one had all the right ingredients: history, scarcity, beauty, and just enough speculation to fuel late-night debates. Nathaniel never sold the coin. It became part of his personal archive, stored in a velvet-lined case next to a letter from the grading company and a handwritten note explaining its discovery. He used it as a teaching tool, telling his students that sometimes the most valuable things are the ones no one's looking for. That even in mass production, imperfection slips through. And that sometimes, the errors tell a deeper story than perfection ever could. The 1965 silver dime wasn't supposed to exist. It was born in a time of upheaval, during a forced evolution in American currency. It represents the collision between old and new, between silver and alloy, between what was meant to be and what accidentally was. And yet, against all odds, it survives, glinting like a secret, hiding in plain sight. Today, collectors consider the 1965 silver dime with doubling to be one of the most elusive transitional errors of the modern coinage era. It combines 2 rare attributes in one coin: a pre-transition composition and a striking error in the date. Such a combination is virtually unheard of, and fewer than a handful are believed to exist in mint state with confirmed doubling. As of now, certified examples in high grade have been valued between $75,000 and $155,000, depending on clarity, strike, and accompanying anomalies. And still, some believe more of them remain lost in forgotten rolls, in dusty drawers, in change jars ignored for generations. The early 1980s were a time of economic tension and rapid technological transition. The nation was adjusting to the aftermath of inflation, adapting to tighter monetary policy, and bracing for an uncertain future. Factories were humming again, but the precision demanded of industry came with pressure. Pressure to perform, to deliver, to meet deadlines. The U.S. Mint, under that same weight, was producing millions of coins per day. Dimes, nickels, quarters, rolling out in waves, identical, perfect, routine. But routine is not always immune to error. In 1981, most of what came out of the mint seemed ordinary. The Roosevelt dime, introduced in 1946, continued its reliable presence. Made from a copper-nickel-clad composition since the silver days ended in 1965, it had long become an everyday item. Tossed in pockets, slotted into meters, forgotten in change trays. The average American wouldn't even glance at the date, but hidden within that mass of everyday dimes, a single anomaly escaped. One so quietly unusual that it would go unnoticed for nearly 4 decades. It would take patience, intuition, and a strange alignment of events to bring it into the light. It started with a man named Leo Branson, a retired postal worker living in a small Pennsylvania town nestled along the Appalachian edge. Leo had never considered himself a collector. But he had always been meticulous. For over 30 years, he had saved every single coin that passed through his hands at work, placing aside anything that looked off-center coins, misstrikes, strange coloration. He didn't analyze them. He just saved them. In 2020, during the early months of global isolation, Leo decided to finally sort through the boxes he'd stashed in his basement. There were jars of quarters, Ziploc bags of nickels, but a small tin of dimes caught his attention. As he laid them out across his kitchen table, one coin refused to blend in. It was a 1981 Roosevelt dime. No mint mark. No unusual color. But when tilted under the light, the word Liberty seemed doubled. Not blurred, not worn, but doubled, as though printed twice, just barely offset. Leo raised his magnifying glass, eyebrows furrowed. The date showed the same effect. The 9 and the 1 appeared shadowed. He flipped the coin to its reverse and noticed something else. The flame in the torch was imperfect, thicker, misaligned slightly, and bleeding into the surrounding lines of the olive branch. Leo wasn't sure what he had. He posted photos to a small online forum and asked for opinions. Most replies were dismissive. Probably just machine doubling, they said. Worth face value. But one user, a numismatist with decades of experience, sent him a private message: weigh it. That's what he said. Just weigh it. Leo borrowed a small scale from his neighbor and did exactly that. The result came back, 2.49 grams. That might not sound remarkable. But the standard weight of a modern clad dime is 2.27 grams. A dime weighing 2.49 grams matched the older silver-based weight class used prior to the full transition in the late 1960s. Leo rechecked the coin. There was no copper stripe along the edge. Just a clean, uniform silver-like appearance all around. Still, something didn't add up. 1981 wasn't a transitional year. By then, silver dimes had been phased out for over 15 years. So how did a planchet like this end up in the press? He contacted a professional grader, who encouraged him to submit the coin for analysis. The process was slow. Delays were common. Leo waited 5 full weeks before the package returned. The grading label made him sit down. 1981 Roosevelt dime, struck on 90% silver planchet. Obverse and reverse die doubling. MS 62.3 major words jumped out: silver planchet, die doubling, mint state. Transitional errors are already rare. Most occur during a shift in metal composition, like those seen in 1965 or 1982. But a coin struck more than a decade after a composition change, and still bearing the old metal? That's more than a mistake. That's an anomaly. A planchet that was either stuck in storage, overlooked in reallocation, or introduced due to a moment of pure human error. Some experts speculated the coin may have been struck on a leftover foreign planchet with silver content, possibly meant for another nation and mixed in accidentally. Others believed it was an overlooked domestic blank, somehow buried in mint inventory and reintroduced without anyone noticing, but the doubling is what made it special. True die doubling, distinct and isolated from machine bounce, was visible in the date, the motto, and even in the flame and olive branches on the reverse. This wasn't the result of a damaged die or vibration. This was a legitimate misalignment of the working hub and die during the manufacturing process. Together, those two characteristics, being struck on a silver planchet and bearing prominent die doubling, formed a coin of extraordinary rarity. A type that can be counted on one hand. Once verified, Leo's dime drew attention. Collectors and dealers alike began tracing every known 1981 era dime, cross-referencing weights, photos, auction results. A similar coin had surfaced in the 1990s, misidentified and sold for a fraction of its worth. Another, possibly a cousin to Leo's coin, had been submitted to a grading service in 2004, but disappeared from public records shortly after. Theories grew. Some said a small batch of silver blanks had been reintroduced accidentally at the Philadelphia Mint. Others claimed that the dies used for 1981 dimes were improperly stored, leading to alignment issues in a limited press run. But the mystery only deepened when another collector in Texas posted a 1981 dime that appeared to show reverse doubling, but on a clad planchet. The idea that multiple errors occurred during that year, but across different planchet types, suggested that 1981 might be more than a blip. It might be a missed chapter in the book of modern minting errors, but Leo's dime remained unmatched that he received private offers. At first, $10,000. Then $22,000. One investor from New Jersey, known for buying unique American coinage, offered $58,000 sight unseen. But Leo didn't rush. He wanted more than money. He wanted to understand what he had found. He attended coin shows, met other collectors, shared his story, and learned more about the Roosevelt dime than he ever imagined. Eventually, a prominent grading authority published an article detailing his coin, calling it one of the most important off-metal errors of the early 1980s. It described the piece as a silent witness to procedural gaps in a high-output, low-tolerance system, and labeled it a museum-grade hybrid between eras. Leo had gone from curious retiree to local legend. Not because he struck it rich, but because he paid attention. Because in a sea of sameness, he spotted the ghost of a mistake. As of now, only one authenticated 1981 Roosevelt dime exists bearing both a silver planchet strike and clear die doubling. That single coin, modest in size but massive in story, now resides in a private collection. The buyer, after months of negotiation, agreed to pay a sum that matched its magnitude. Today, that coin is estimated to be worth between $62,000 and $124,000 depending on future market interest, die attribution, and completeness of the doubling, and so it stands, not as a fluke, but as proof that in a world obsessed with control and duplication, some mistakes are too perfect to ignore. The machines never stopped. At the U.S. Mint in 1973, the roar of presses echoed day and night. Coinage demand was relentless. A recovering economy, rising consumer activity, and growing population meant every cent, nickel, dime, and quarter was needed. As the mint churned out billions of coins across multiple facilities, the challenge was not just to keep pace, but to do so flawlessly. But in the shadows of that constant motion, a mistake occurred. It was small. Invisible, at first. A sliver of error wedged deep within the industrial process. The kind of mistake that gets buried in the rhythm of repetition. Unnoticed. Undocumented. Untraceable. Until someone years later picks it up and stares a second longer. In 1973, Roosevelt dimes were mundane. They had been clad coins for nearly a decade, since silver was stripped away in the mid-60s. Most bore the Philadelphia or Denver mint mark. Most weighed 2.27 grams. Most had a clear copper-nickel stripe visible along their edge. They were designed to be forgettable. Spendable. Unremarkable, but some weren't, and one, in particular, would surface almost half a century later, concealed in a coffee can on a wooden shelf in Western Oregon. Peter Walsh wasn't a coin collector. Not officially. He was a retired logger, part-time antique dealer, and full-time wanderer of thrift shops and garage sales. He liked things with age. Things that rattled with history. He often bought lots of old boxes at estate sales, rarely knowing what he was looking for, just trusting the feel of it. In 2021, at a rainy weekend sale hosted by a couple downsizing after 50 years of marriage, Peter spotted a heavy ceramic canister with a broken lid labeled simply, dimes, 60s to 70s. He offered $5. They countered with $2. He paid and didn't look inside until he got home. The dimes were mostly junk. Circulated, grimy, darkened with time. He poured them out across the table, expecting nothing. But one coin caught the light differently. A 1973 Roosevelt dime. It wasn't the date that stood out. It was the color. It lacked the dull grayness of its companions. Instead, it shone, subtly brighter, almost white. He turned it on its edge. No copper core. Peter had never studied coin errors, but he knew enough to recognize that something was off. He retrieved his small kitchen scale. The coin weighed 2.48 grams, the official weight for a clad dime, 2.27 grams, the official weight for a pre-1965 silver dime, 2.50 grams, close. Unnervingly close that he reached out to a friend of his son's, an amateur numismatist who often sold on eBay. The young man came over that evening and brought his loupe. Together, they examined the dime. The outer edge was pure, consistent metal. No sandwiching. The rim was unusually sharp. The strike, clean, maybe even proof-like. But there was more. Roosevelt's eye was oddly doubled, not scratched. Not worn. Doubled. The motto, "In God We Trust," bore a subtle shadow, like a faint echo behind the letters. The date too. Especially the 3. It was strange. Peter had stumbled onto something beyond a simple silver coin. This was a 1973 dime with at least 2 traits it should not possess: a silver-based composition and signs of doubling in multiple fields. They submitted the coin for grading. The turnaround took 6 weeks. The results arrived in a carefully taped box, padded with foam, and inside, a sealed holder with a white label. 1973 Roosevelt dime, struck on 90% silver planchet, obverse doubling, AU 58. Transitional error. Die anomaly. An authenticated, off-metal strike with visible design distortion. It shouldn't have been possible. By 1973, the mint silver blanks were long gone, supposedly. All dimes were struck from copper-nickel clad blanks by then. But the record wasn't flawless. There were murmurs in the coin community. Hushed mentions of silver planchets occasionally getting stuck in storage bins or misfed into presses during non-standard press runs. Quality assurance, after all, was still largely manual in that era. One oversight could produce a coin like this. Just one. The doubling, however, was something else. It wasn't machine bounce. It wasn't common die fatigue. It was real doubling, meaning the working hub and die used to strike the coin were misaligned during production. A rare and collectible condition. Some call it a fluke of pressure and timing. Others see it as the mint's human side peeking through. Peter began digging into public records, trying to find another example. He couldn't. Not one confirmed 1973 dime struck on a silver planchet with visible obverse doubling had ever crossed auction blocks or certification agencies. There were 1,965 transitional dimes. A few 1968 S-proof misstrikes. Even a couple of 1982 off-metal dimes. But 1973? Nothing. He held something singular. The numismatic world started to take notice. Articles were published. Forums buzzed. Some speculated that a small batch of leftover silver blanks, perhaps mistakenly sorted with foreign contract planchets, had found their way into the 1973 Philadelphia Mint press. A theory emerged that during maintenance or a press retool, a tray of outdated blanks was used to keep machines running without delay. Impossible to prove. Yet, just plausible enough to believe. Then another voice chimed in. An archivist from a mint museum reached out and mentioned that in 1972 and 1973, the U.S. Mint had worked on contract coinage for several small countries, coins with silver content and similar size to dimes. Some planchets could have shared diameter, even thickness. All it would have taken was one misfiled shipment. The mystery deepened. Peter didn't rush to sell. He consulted with professionals, collectors, even a few historians. He received private offers, $10,000, then $30,000. One dealer flew in from Chicago, sat in Peter's kitchen, and offered $65,000 in cash on the spot. Peter declined. He felt the coin deserved more than a quick trade. It had a story. A presence. A whisper of imperfection surviving inside a system built for precision. Eventually, he consigned it to a rare coin auction under strict anonymity. The catalog listing included a detailed write-up, the off-metal strike, the strong doubling, the unconfirmed but theorized foreign planchet crossover. The description didn't promise a price, it promised a riddle. Collectors were drawn to it. Not because it was flashy, but because it was unsolvable. the auction ended in a final hammer price above $95,000. The buyer remains undisclosed. What matters is that the coin is real. It exists. It defies the rules written into the minting process. It serves as living proof that even the most regulated systems have blind spots. And in those blind spots, anomalies wait. Not many. Just a few. And most will never be found, but for those who look closely, those who feel a coin's weight, examine its shine, and question its edges, sometimes a quiet treasure appears. The 1973 Roosevelt dime in question, as of now, remains one of the few known error dimes from that year, featuring both a silver composition and noticeable doubling. A numismatic ghost. A coin that shouldn't have been, today, based on its rarity, confirmed characteristics, and condition. Its value is estimated between $68,000 and $129,000, depending on the volatility of the error coin market and future discoveries of similar anomalies. But even if another one never appears, the story has already been told. And it began with a cracked ceramic jar on a rainy Saturday morning. The year was 1999, and the world was holding its breath. With the turn of the millennium approaching, everything felt charged, technology accelerating, fears of Y2K spreading, and change humming through every wire and machine. At the U.S. Mint, production continued at a relentless pace. The presses ran around the clock, striking billions of coins for a country caught between decades. Among them were dimes, small, ordinary, easily overlooked. The Roosevelt dime, unchanged in design since 1946, was by then so familiar that nobody gave it a second glance. But within that sea of predictable, mass-produced currency, something slipped past the machines. A mistake. A coin unlike the others. A dime that defied the very standards the mint worked so hard to uphold. In late 2022, a man named Marcus Lane was sorting through his father's coin collection in a quiet corner of Arizona. His father had passed away the year before, leaving behind a shoebox full of coins from flea markets, change jars, and local finds. Nothing fancy, mostly loose change saved on impulse. Marcus wasn't a collector, but something about his father's hobby drew him in. He laid each coin out on the kitchen counter, watching for dates, colors, or any oddity that might justify a second look, and that's when he found it. A 1999 Roosevelt dime. The date caught his eye only because it brought back memories of old fears, that turn-of-the-century panic, the tension people had felt about computers shutting down. But the more he looked, the more peculiar the coin appeared. The surface seemed slightly brighter than the others. Not cleaner. Just different. Almost too polished. He tilted it under the light. The reflection was almost mirror-like, but not in the way of a proof coin. There was no mint mark, which wasn't uncommon for Philadelphia strikes. Still, something felt off. When he looked at the edge of the coin, his breath caught. No copper. No layered stripe of clad metal. Instead, the edge was uniformly silver-colored, matching the face of the coin itself. That was strange. He grabbed another dime from the box, one dated 1995. The edge had the expected copper core clearly exposed. He lined them up. Side by side, the 1999 dime looked lighter, thinner even. He couldn't explain why it made his pulse race, but it did. Marcus didn't own a scale, so he brought the coin to a local pawn shop that had a jewelry counter. The man behind the desk weighed it and raised his eyebrows. "This thing's 2.5 grams, he said. That meant nothing to Marcus, until the man explained that modern dimes should weigh 2.27 grams. And that a 2.5-gram weight aligned with the silver dime struck before 1965. Still, how could a silver dime have been minted in 1999? It didn't make sense. The pawn shop guy shrugged. Might be fake. Or something weird. You'd have to ask a coin expert. And so he did. Marcus sent pictures to an online coin forum. The responses were immediate, and divided. Some claimed it had to be a standard-clad dime that had been acid-washed, or altered somehow to appear silver. Others urged him to weigh it more precisely and check for other features. One user, an experienced numismatist, asked him a simple question. "Do the letters on the front look doubled?" Marcus examined the coin again. Carefully this time. The word liberty did seem slightly doubled, but only on the right side. The Y especially had a faint echo behind it. And the date? The 9 in 1999 had what looked like a shadow curve beside it. Subtle, but clearly not a scratch. This changed everything. A double die error and a silver planchet combined on one dime? That would be something extraordinary. He sent the coin to a grading service for authentication. Weeks passed. He almost forgot about it, until the email arrived. 1999 Roosevelt dime, struck on 90% silver planchet, obverse doubling present, MS61. Marcus didn't understand the full significance at first. The grading details were technical. But the internet quickly filled in the blanks. A silver dime struck in 1999 was a major error, far more significant than most realized. The U.S. Mint had long ceased striking dimes on silver planchets for circulation by then. All coins were struck on copper-nickel-clad blanks. A silver blank appearing in the press line was rare. To have it struck with a double die was even rarer. Experts speculated that a leftover silver blank intended for collector-proof sets might have been mistakenly fed into a standard circulation press. These proof blanks, used for special mint sets, had higher silver content and were intended only for controlled environments. But the chaos of production, especially in a high-output year like 1999, sometimes allowed for strange things to happen. The doubling on the obverse was verified by graders to be hub doubling, not post-strike damage. That meant during the die creation process, the design was inadvertently impressed twice, misaligned slightly, causing the faint, ghost, images on the coin's front. Combining an off-metal strike with die doubling created a sort of perfect storm, two distinct errors, each rare on their own, coexisting on a single coin. Marcus's discovery began to circulate through the numismatic community. Articles were published. YouTubers and bloggers covered the story. The coin became a subject of debate among experts. Was it a fluke? Or evidence of a broader, unnoticed error run at the mint? A few auction houses reached out directly. They asked to examine the coin, suggesting that it could be the only known example of its kind from that year. They began referencing older mint reports, trying to identify how a silver blank could have gone unnoticed for so long. It was then that another revelation surfaced. A collector in Michigan claimed to have found a 1999 dime with unusual edge characteristics, no copper stripe. But theirs showed signs of wear and corrosion, and it was never authenticated. Still, the implication was clear: Marcus's dime might not be entirely alone. Even so, none of the others were verified with both silver composition and die doubling. His coin stood alone in that category. As demand grew, so did the offers. He received private bids of $20,000, then $35,000. One email came from a buyer in Singapore, offering $50,000 contingent on in-person inspection. But Marcus held off. He wasn't sure what to do. He had stumbled into something with unexpected value and wasn't ready to let it go too soon. Eventually, he agreed to let a major auction house list the coin under their spring event. The catalog described it as an impossibility made real, and a coin that bridges decades of minting history through a moment of overlooked error. The narrative emphasized the unique overlap between technological speed and human oversight, a coin born from both progress and mistake. Collectors flocked to the listing. There were whispers that it might break records for late-century error coins. On auction day, the bid climbed steadily. $30,000. Then $45,000. It paused at $61,000. Jumped to $72,000. Then a private collector entered a sealed final bid. The gavel fell at $94,000. Marcus watched the live stream from home, stunned, grateful, and slightly amused that something so small could carry such a massive story. Now, the 1999 Roosevelt dime with both a silver planchet and obverse doubling holds a place in the archives of American numismatics. Not just for its error, but for what it represents, a hidden anomaly that lived quietly for over 2 decades in a forgotten shoebox. As of today, the coin's estimated market value ranges from $45,000 to $105,000, depending on market demand, potential discovery of similar specimens, and its maintained grade. The presses at the U.S. Mint were running smoothly in 2004. It was a year marked by economic rebound, technological innovation, and routine precision in coin production. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, especially not within the 10-cent denomination. The Roosevelt dime, an unchanging staple since 1946, was stamped by the millions in Philadelphia and Denver without drawing so much as a sideways glance. It was utilitarian. Quiet. Just a coin. No one suspected that buried within the avalanche of those dimes was something else, an anomaly so rare, it would take nearly 2 decades and a retired aerospace technician with a sharp eye to finally recognize it for what it was. David Brenner had always enjoyed detail. After spending his career calibrating instruments in an aerospace lab, retirement left him looking for new ways to stay sharp. He turned to coins. At first, it was casual, a way to unwind, to sort, to research. But over time, it became more than that. He began documenting patterns, learning about mint errors, understanding the language of anomalies that most people overlooked. In early 2023, he purchased a small, untouched bag of mixed coins from an estate sale in Albuquerque. It was listed simply as coins, 1980s and up, $10 face value. He sat at his kitchen table that night and began sorting by denomination. It was mostly quarters and dimes. And it was while sorting the dimes by date that he noticed something that didn't quite sit right. A 2004 Roosevelt dime. Denver Mint. At first glance, nothing screamed unusual. But the finish was different. It seemed to shimmer in a way he couldn't explain, not shinier, not polished, just somehow cleaner. He inspected it under magnification. The rim looked oddly thick. The edge had no visible copper strip. It was solid, bright, and the color extended evenly from face to edge, an unusual trait for a modern dime. He weighed at 2.49 grams, that couldn't be right. Modern clad dimes weigh 2.27 grams. This was almost exactly the weight of a pre-1965 silver dime, but it was dated 2004. Silver dimes hadn't been issued for circulation since 1964. He knew that. Everyone in the numismatic world did. So how could this one be heavier? And on a silver-colored planchet, he weighed it again. Same result. Then he looked closer at the date. And his pulse quickened. There was a ghost-like doubling on the number 4. Not just a light shadow, this looked like a hub misalignment. He checked the letters in Liberty. The B and E showed a second outline. The phrase "In God We Trust"? Slight doubling there, too. He knew what he had. A double die error. And possibly more. He packaged the coin carefully and sent it to a grading and authentication service, marking it as a suspected off-metal error with visible doubling. The waiting felt endless. When the results came back, David read the label again and again, unable to believe what he was holding. 2004 D Roosevelt dime, struck on silver planchet, obverse double die, AU 55. Everything he'd suspected had been confirmed. But the implications were deeper than just rarity. How had a silver planchet ended up in a 2004 coin press? Some theories began to circulate. That year, the mint had struck silver-proof sets using 90% silver planchets for collectors. Those blanks were supposed to be tightly controlled, isolated, and fed into designated presses for limited edition proof coins. Yet somehow, at least one had found its way into the standard Denver Mint production line. Either a planchet had been misrouted, or leftover stock had been improperly stored. It was possible, just possible, that during press maintenance or a misfeed, a silver blank had slipped into the hopper and been struck alongside thousands of clad coins. The doubling only intensified the intrigue. It wasn't the typical mechanical kind caused by die bounce. It was a true double die, visible under magnification and evident in multiple areas of the coin's obverse. The combination of these two traits made the coin unique. Experts confirmed that no other certified example of a 2004 silver planchet dime with a double die had surfaced in official records. Word spread quickly. Numismatic forums began discussing it. A few skeptics called it a fluke, even a potential fake, until third-party graders confirmed both the metal composition and the error characteristics. Others speculated that the coin might have originated from a test strike or even a training error, a planchet meant for destruction that somehow slipped into circulation. David received offers immediately. The first offer was modest, $7,000 from a local dealer who claimed to do him a favor. The next was $18,000 from a collector in California. A coin auction house in New York offered to showcase it in their spring catalog and estimated a minimum hammer price of $45,000. David hesitated. He wasn't in a rush. He wanted to understand its place in the broader story of mint history. So he dug deeper. He contacted a former mint employee who had worked in Denver in the early 2000s. Off the record, the employee admitted that mistakes did happen. Especially when dealing with special planchets, he said. You keep them separate, but one wrong bin, one mislabeled tray, and a silver blank ends up where it shouldn't be. The scenario was plausible. Then came the twist. An email arrived from a private collector based in Berlin. He claimed to have purchased a similar coin from a Midwest auction 2 years prior, another 2004 dime that weighed 2.49 grams and bore faint doubling. But his had been damaged in circulation, heavily worn. Still, if true, it meant that more than one rogue silver blank might have been struck that year. It meant that David's dime wasn't just rare, it could be part of an ultra-limited anomaly run, the kind that fuels legends in coin lore. Eventually, David agreed to auction it through a firm known for handling rare U.S. mint errors. The coin was listed as a dual anomaly, struck on silver planchet with prominent obverse doubling, likely one of fewer than 3 known specimens. The listing generated quiet frenzy. Phone bidders lined up early. A handful of dealers showed up in person. The bidding opened at $30,000 and quickly jumped to $45,000. Then it stalled. A long silence. Then a sudden bid, $52,000. Then $61,000. A final volley pushed the hammer price to $78,500. The coin was sold to a private collector in New Jersey, but its story had already taken root. Today, the 2004 Roosevelt dime struck on a silver planchet with visible obverse doubling remains one of the most mysterious and intriguing error coins of the early 21st century. The fact that it survived uncirculated for years in a bag of forgotten coins only adds to its mystique. For collectors, it's a reminder that even in a world of automation and tight controls, the unexpected can still happen. That a small, easily overlooked dime can slip through the cracks of perfection and emerge decades later with a story, a signature, and a secret that no machine could explain. As of now, the value of such a coin, if another ever appears, would be estimated between $40,000 and $85,000 depending on its condition, strike clarity, and whether it bears similar doubling. But in truth, for those who understand what it represents, its real worth stretches far beyond numbers. It's a whisper from inside the mint. A rare echo of imperfection inside a machine meant to forget its flaws.